Mhm. Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Winter, and I'm here with Bridget
Bridget
Nielsen.
Nielsen.
Glad you're here. Bridget was over here in France with us. What is that? A year or two ago?
Yes, it was so amazing.
and and um, and so Bridget is doing some serious work with the Kogi, actually, Indigenous peoples, and she's going to tell us about it.
Yeah.
And this conversation is to include a conversation about the science of shamanic work, some of my Phil Callahan stories and the rainmaking stories and the Aboriginal stories. And also later, Amar is with us from Brazil, who worked with us on the rainmaking project and has done work with the shamanic tribes in Brazil, et cetera. We'll see how it goes. But the idea is that there could be some serious lessons about shamanic work in terms of the science behind and make it modern and empowering. So, Bridget, do you want to tell us how you came in to bump into the Kogis in that story?
Oh, I think it's one of those soul connection pieces where somehow even being far away on the planet, we come back together. And so for me, there's a group working with some of the different tribes peoples in Arizona as like a North American constituent, if you will, working with some of the principles and bringing them to the West. And it's a private group, and it's all very undercover in the sense that it's just humble work that we're doing, but it's based on those principles and that guidance. And the big key is that it's the Kogi, but they're the mediums for the earth, and so it's really the earth,
Right.
right? And listening to the earth and what the earth is needing, and that's their gift, is that ability to listen and that ability to understand, particularly the purpose, to remember. So the Kogi and the other tribes, I would say throughout South America and different areas across the world, of course, is that they remember the pre-ancient wisdom of the purposes of each different element of nature, right? Of the river. What was the purpose of the river? What is the purpose of the forest? And so in that remembrance, the way that I look at it is through Rupert Sheldrake's work, is it's the morphic understanding. They hold and remember those templates of nature. And so then when nature is disturbed by humans and certain levels of consciousness, they can help it rebalance back to its original purpose. So that's what I'm seeing.
And there was that you mentioned they were working at saving a particular river valley. I'm remembering particularly Valerie and I were watching this amazing film about the Kogi and basically the Kogi, I guess they call them the mamas, don't they? They were walking around in the lower reaches of the river valley, showing where the pollution at the lower reaches was literally what was preventing the rainfall up way up high in the forest in the mountain, and making that connection logically that if you pollute the feet of the river, the head of the river doesn't work. And that was like a new concept. It was so beautiful in that film. So what you mentioned the name of that river valley, I think, didn't you?
So that one I think that you're referring to is in Colombia.
Yeah.
That one is in Colombia. The one that we're working with right now is in Arizona. But it's the same. It's the same principle. It's the idea that these are living beings, right? The rivers are living, and
Exactly.
we have to honor that. It's not like we can just do whatever it wants. It wants, and it'll keep flowing. That's not the case,
Yeah.
right?
They were showing the tragedy when they put like a chemical plant and industry at the tail of the river where the river hits the ocean that directly affected the head of the river ability to track rain.
So drying the lagoons.
And yes, and the lagoons, the marshland, by drying it out, it prevented the actual cloud formation. Yeah,
Affected the whole.
see, Valerie's here giving me a lesson. Valerie's teaching a lesson on rainmaking right here. She's right. And so that was the point, that what it is that attracts clouds. Actually, we have an energy team. I will mention Jay Dubinsky, Energy, and we've designed energy technologies for the issues around the Panama Canal right now. And that would be a
Mm.
prime example, because the Panama Canal, of course, everyone knows, is literally dying. And it's dying because of lack of water and lack of rain, and that's well known. And the whole country of Panama is literally at risk. And they actually published, they did a study, I have to find the link, where they showed how many thousand acres or hectares of rainforest it takes to attract enough rain to keep the canal in water. And they know that if they lose that forest, the canal is toast. So the physics of rainmaking is getting to be the issue. And we're delighted that Amar is with us from Brazil here, where we did a rainmaking project. And just to summarize, Amar tells the story wonderfully, but they were having fires across his area in Brazil. And we did a rainmaking project. The pictures are at goldenmean.info/rain. And the physics were, we've taught this for a long time, that if you install a stone circle in a labyrinth, and particularly if you do it where there's a magnetic line cross, a node, which we now would call longitudinal, which Karatkov, who followed the Kogi to measure, they would call it sacred space, where they can phone ancestors. And he measured the fractality of the air there to prove what sacred space is electrically, which is simply a node of compression, actually, which is where sort of DNA, radio, and longitudinal waves in general make phone calls. Anyway, if you place the stone circle in the labyrinth, it becomes electrically centripetal. But the key also to what Amar did with his teacher friend in Brazil, which was so fabulous, and you can actually see a film of the teacher watching the rain come down, which saved the town as the flames were approaching, was they had the kids do it. And the kids, there's pure intention all over the place, and juju and groundedness and magnetic energy. So the physics of rainmaking, of course, has everything to do with shamanism, as we both know.
And so me in Arizona here, where, the monsoons aren't coming anymore. We've joked on our last call that I can make rain stop in Hawaii and when I need to in certain situations, but I'm not as good at making it rain, or I don't know what that requires. What would I do here? What would be the science that you would give to me in Sedona to make the monsoons come back?
Yeah, Bridget and I were joking because, in fact, I think Amar actually called after the rain. They said urgently, "Well, how do you stop the rain?" And I said to Amar, I warned you in advance. That's not a skill that I offer. It's not included in the curriculum. But actually, it's true that making rain has been, a lifelong passion of mine. And I joke that it has to do with a fragment of the soul memory of Tutankhamun, who was a rainmaker, genetically maybe. But the physics is really quite simple, that it could be introduced by what in Trevor Constable's book, Weather Engineering on the High Seas, the angle of the conic capacitor called orgone that is most effective at rainmaking by measurement in the text, famous Trevor Constable, is in fact a 60-degree cone capacitor, which is basically charge implosion. Now, another famous way to do this is to use columnated pipes in the Reichian tradition. And if the pipe diameters are tuned in the microwave appropriately, and you can use my equation to optimize. So there's lots of ways to do it, actually. The point is to columnate in such a way that it becomes long wave coherent, and ideally that the long wave and short wave come into implosive ratio. And that's what makes it centripetal and what enables rainmaking. Amar, did you want to say something, Amar?
No, I just, you were talking about our experience, and it was actually all of Brazil. And Brazil has rainforests. So it's not just something of the west coast of the U.S. where all the desertification has been happening. It's happening here too, even in rainforest. Yeah. We probably having maybe 2 years of almost 100% drought. Okay, in the rainforest. So something strange is happening, and you've got the climate change deniers, of course, but in the field, in the front line here, we are seeing that. So yes, in our situation, it flooded. It went from one extreme. The kids, most of Brazil, three biomas were on fire. 3 regions of Brazil, continental, this big territory here, and getting to close to major cities, including state capitals. And it was a desperate situation. And so I did it desperately because I didn't believe it, to be honest with you, but we were desperate. And it was a very desperate situation. Now, the kids at the beginning, the teacher, Jacqueline, she said, I'm having trouble with them concentrating, but it was getting desperate. Even in my city, I was seeing the flames, and many cities were seeing the flames come close to the homes. And I said, okay, then tell them that they better concentrate or their houses are going to catch on fire. And then this was an experiment, various tries. And then when they got scared into really, because they really saw it was all the cities, us too, were seeing the flames coming very close to the homes. And this is a very poor neighborhood and a very poor region. And they really did concentrate, and their intent came out a little bit out of fear, because that was the way that we could make them focus. But it rained. It rained after several experiments, and I tried this. Unfortunately, I had to do the scare tactic because to save the village. We had to have faith in it, or there's no fire department that was going to put out the whole country, okay, and save many cities and many villages. So it was do or die. So they did it, but then it rained for a week straight, and there were major floods. So then that's when I called Dan. I said, how do we make it stop now? And and if later you guys want to hear my story in River Valley, also with the shaman rituals, how they were able to stop the rain right where the ritual was for a week, then let me know, and I'm happy to share.
But, and the point being that what they actually did, and you can actually see a picture at goldenmean.info/rain of it was a piezo quartz in a circle spiral that makes charge implosion. Ideally, if it's done at a place where ley lines cross, in this case, it was a children's school, which, magnetic lines do tend to cross when you have a children's school. And so they did it, to make the centripetal force. And I must say, when we did that ritual, Valerie members at in Trimurti, yeah, we had the group make a labyrinth. And I have to say, actually, on that occasion also, the storm was the biggest storm they'd had in 10 years. Well, I don't know, but it was a huge storm, and it was within hours when we completed this labyrinth there, actually. So
now I have a question. So
Yeah.
you were just saying, well, one, I want to know what the kids were doing. Like what you said that they needed to focus. What were they focusing on, and what were they doing together? That's what I'm interested in.
They were installing a stone circle, and you can see the picture, and they actually used piezoelectric quartz, which is ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And they put it in a spiral in that case, although a labyrinth would also have been good. And I don't think they actually knew the detailed physics that it's best if you do a little dousing before you start to find a cross point. But when you install that stone, and then of course you would either hold hands or do some kind of ritual. But the point was they were actually installing a magnetic vortex, literally together, with the intent to call the elementals. And interestingly, I think in both cases, when there was too much rain, my sense of it is you have very angry elementals, actually, because we haven't been talking to them. That's
Right. It's the first time.
Yeah.
And then there is a little bit of that. If there is fear in the intention, I feel like the combination of the angry possible elementals that hadn't been talked to,
Yeah.
as well as, and that is one key that I've used when I have stopped rain. On several occasions, my former partner Patrick can attest, is because I had a communication, because I was living, it was on Maui, and in very rainforested, always raining situations. I mean, it rains, I think, like 96% of the time where I was. And I had an ongoing relationship with the elementals. I would talk to them a lot, and so they knew me and I knew them. And so then when I'd have these groups come and I'm going, hey, they're coming in February to Hawaii. They don't want to sit in rain for 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would talk to them and say, hey, can you open up, and can you stop raining for these times? And it would happen 70 to 80% of the time.
Mm-hmm. Which is great. And that's a key also to recognize, because what we were taught was that elementals who are ignored eventually have the feeling that humans are quote unquote drunk. that, you know, they know they're an intimate part of our ecosystem. And they know that they're designed to be working with us. But, you know, this is an essential key here, that once we recognize that plasma clouds are potentially intelligent, then we can understand elementals, we can understand ghosts, we can understand how the surgeons see outside their body when they're in near-death experiences, et cetera. So the plasma cloud, it can be very intelligent, and large plasma clouds, obviously, the higher elementals, like first you have the gnomes, then you have the angelics, they're extremely powerful. And so all these people that are running around complaining about tornadoes out of control don't realize that these plasma clouds are potentially mindful. And there's that old story, and the web article is very clear. It's goldenmean.info/dowsing, where you followed a shaman to steer a tornado, and you watch the shaman steering the tornado. And the first thing you see with a bit of clairvoyance, as we've said many times, is you see, they call it bioplasmic streamers coming from the belly of the shaman and embedding, and perfect nesting, imploding, as it were, into the heart of the tornado. And if you ask the shaman his activity of that moment, classically they say, yeah, I'm eating the hoocha of the tornado, which we now know means eating the anger. And actually, we go deeper into that meaning. It means I'm feeling the pain. And see, once the tornado realizes someone else is feeling its pain, but in order to do that, of course, you might need to know what pain is. And as we said, we really understand that pain is fractality that's broken, and thus compression that's broken, and therefore it bleeds charge. So anything that prevents implosive charge compression is perceived as pain, both for humans and tornadoes. Practical example, if a tornado is passing over a metal city or a metal trailer park, then the tornado would experience metal geopathics as pain because it's bleeding its charge. So when the shaman says, I'm eating the hooch, I'm feeling the pain of the tornado, then the tornado falls in love with the shaman, so to speak, like the plasma elementals in Hawaii with you probably. And there's an embedding process, and the embedding process is identical with the compression called compassion. And that's the moment of steerage, because then you become the center of gravity of, so to speak.
Wow, there's a lot there. That empathy, right? That empathetic connection with whatever it's feeling, which means connection, relationship building. We're seeing a theme here.
Yes.
And what is the kids, when you talk about you said that there can be lines that cross under schools. Does that mean that they are not already there, but because of the kids, they come into place? Or how does that work?
Well, it's if you're advanced geobiologists know that places where happy kids dance barefoot in the mud radically attract magnetic lines big time. It's understandable physics, actually, just like it attracts people and rain. There's that old story in Vukovar, Yugoslavia, where the underground water completely disappeared because of the war, because the water doesn't want to touch the anger. And so the women came, and the women did a labyrinth and a circle and a ritual, and you could measure the underground water coming back. So the water is about touch. It's why if you touch somebody that loves you and their skin turns pink, they like you because they're sending their blood to the surface to touch. It's very attractive.
And why the kids? Why is it the kids that it works with even more, say, than adults?
Well, I mean, classically, for the same reason, I suppose, that kids are more teachable when it comes to teaching kids to steer without their eyes and to see without their eyes. Adults can learn to see without their eyes, but kids learn much, much faster. We've measured that. And we know exactly what that is, by the way. The physics is very simple. It's a vortex tornado of charged plasma inside your head, which becomes an eyeball. And I'm talking as an electrical engineer. This is not just metaphor. This is physics. That you develop the brainwave harmonics, which are implosive, and then the plasma vortex inside your head gets to focus, and all the kids report the same thing. Oh, I'm seeing a little tube vortex tunnel open up inside my head, and then they look around and they can see through it, and they're completely blindfolded. So, and you know, Patrick, our programmer, actually learned to do that a little bit by working with the kids. But you know, adults have to work really hard to do that, or kids. So it really is helpful to know what the physics of consciousness is and the physics of vision. It's a tornado with an eyeball, literally, of charge. And
Beautiful.
so another way of saying that is kids have access to pure intention better, which means a shareable wave and too, I suppose.
So there it is, pure intention, because that's what the Kogi very much so talk about, is their big thing is internal order and internal ongwe, what they call it, balanced spirit. So that pure intention with all of you, all of your organs, all of your being is critical. And if you have that, then the interaction with nature is incredibly powerful and beyond.
I love it that, what was that word again? Ongwe?
Ongwe.
Ongwe. So that's the Kogi word for?
Balanced spirit, spiritual thought.
Because Valerie talks about Ananda Marga and becoming one with the great one intelligence. And I always thought about my work with the Iroquois, and of course they call it the Great Spirit. But, you know, how would you do this lesson in a physics class? That's what when people talk about becoming, you know, making a hot dog for the Dalai Lama, if he ordered it, make me one with everything. But one with everything, what does that actually mean if you want to teach a physics class? And I think we could now actually teach that in a physics class, actually, which is that the physics is that the power spectrum of all of the body frequencies we know in the brain waves and the HRV and the sacrocranial and the EKG, and we actually know what if it's the Mayer wave and if it's the ringing in the ears heard by meditators. All of those frequencies generally falls into the equation Planck times golden ratio called fractality. So basically, it's embedding with the pure implosion at the vortex of Planck threshold, the musical key signature of the universe, which is where transverse waves become longitudinal, and embedding in that center vortex, I've called it DNA radio for years, and I think it's good physics, actually. So the reason that that's pure intention is because you, at that broadcast frequency, phase conjugation to Planck, pure fractality, the holy grail, as it were, is the only place where all waves must agree. And so the fractal library of longitudinal coherence, the sacred grid of the sacred frequencies of the earth, the dodecacosa earth grid, that radio station can only broadcast perfectly shareable waves. You know, pure intention, literally the physics of pure intention, literally, which, so to get into that broadcast channel does require pure intention, but it also requires compression. And that's why at the moment of death, for example, or birth, it's literally an electrical black hole. We've talked about that many times, but that to get that into that distribution, a practical example is why something like Therify is so good at helping ghosts who are stuck, because they need the electrical implosive compression to get into that distribution. But another example that I think fits our conversation at the moment is for many years working with the Aboriginal tribes in Byron Bay. Do you remember which one it was? Was it the Bunjalung? Auntie Lorraine? The famous story, when Auntie Lorraine died, the rainstorm that went up her tribal magnetic line across the continent. I mean, it was a storm that took out half the continent. You know, when she died, Auntie Lorraine of the Bunjalung, the tribe there. The reason those rainstorms are so linked to the Aboriginal elders, saints, is extension of just what you were talking about, what happened to you in Hawaii. They had not just one lifetime, but many lifetimes of relationships with large elemental spirits. And just last thing, while we made that point, when our friend Malcolm Borgward of Perth, recognizing the tragedy of, you know, thousands of years of curses between the men tribe and a women tribe in Aboriginal, who have a different language. And by the way, that's straight Draco tradition. So the men tribe and the women tribe speak a different language because of Draco rules. And so they die with curses, which create deserts, literally it's opposite of permission to touch, which is the physics of rainmaking. And so the proof of that is when Malcolm would go along and all the tribal towns along the whole magnetic line, he'd do a ritual to heal the ancient pain between the men and the women of those tribes. And every single time, dozens of times, he can tell you the story, huge rainstorms followed him right across the continent.
Whoa. Interconnectedness of land and peoples right there.
Yeah.
And will you tell the, since we're on that continent right now in the conversation, will you tell the story of how the elders would create that connection or mapping to the land in the future generations? That it's not just, oh, one generation I'm connected to this land, but it's those thousands of lifetimes and how that's done?
Yeah, it's related to the concept of a Abraxas point in Aboriginal lore, which is why the Aboriginal woman, especially the Aboriginal shaman, what's the word for Aboriginal shaman? It's actually an old Draco term. She would, when she felt for the first time the baby move in the womb, her first known proof inside herself she was pregnant, they would run and fetch the tribe shaman. And they would sit down then and they'd find the place where she first felt the baby leap in the womb, the fetus, and they would sit and get a flat stone and draw a picture of the magnetic lines, the song lines, the dreaming tracks of that place on that land. And later, when that child was born, that would be the title deed for that child whose land they were responsible for lucid dreaming to hold that land together. Yeah. And so that's embeddability. And the story was that, it's more than metaphor, that if your ancestors walked the same sacred lines barefoot for 1,000 years, your DNA would become fractal to that land, thus creating the leverage that, as you say, is that lifetime relationship with the elemental beings. And so they called them song lines, dreaming tracks, because literally as they're walking down that song line, they sing the correct song for the correct location. And we now know the piezoelectric phonon low frequency physics of why those low frequencies of that song would actually braid that line together with their own DNA and give them leverage on the grid. I mean, it's actually all very good physics.
Oh my gosh. I had a friend, she's pregnant right now. I have quite a few pregnant friends. And we were doing this gathering connected with the Kogi and the work that we're doing up here. And it was a 4-day gathering and she's pregnant. And she felt the first move as we were in this group doing all this work.
Yeah.
And about 20 minutes later, I walk over to her and tell her that story. I was like, hey, so when this baby kicks, let me know. And it just done so. And so it was pretty amazing that it was in that connection of that synergy of the land and peoples. It's not her native land, but, I guess it's translatable in this sense.
Yes. And the science here, again, relates to the fact that when the Aboriginal child is shown their title deed to their land, which is actually a magnetic line, a dreaming track, and instructed that their dreaming is what needs to hold that land together. Otherwise, it will fall apart, you see. And I remember the rituals of the Iroquois. They did ritual for like tens of hours at a time, which was the ritual to make the spring and the seasons come on time, and they literally took responsibility for. And we now realize that it's the fractality of the centripetal force of the long waves. Ultimately, that is the role of human consciousness that's added to stars to make star birth sustainable, is that centripetal force, the ability to embed the long wave.
And that's through the rituals that they're doing, you're saying? Yes.
Yeah, the Haudenosaunee and the Iroquois. And I must thank David Yarrow, who lived with me at the time, who wrote the book about that, entitled Dragon in the Ice Castle, in which the dragon is the magnetic line. And they're literally talking to the track in the magnetic line.
Wow.
Yeah.
One question, and then I want to open it up to the others and stuff. But it's interesting because I would like you to break down the possible science of this. But we're talking about how the embedded nature of our own genetics with certain land spaces, which I absolutely feel because I have Native American in my lineage, and they were my dad was never displaced, and he was also initiated, so I feel very connected to that land space, and I can hear the ancestors in the mountains there, and it's really, really strong. But when I go to other places, I also have that ability, and I'm wondering if it's like that is in my field and it translates so that those new places then recognize me. It's a little bit tricky to know because in Hawaii I definitely have had other lives there, so that could be a recognition too. But I'm wondering, because not all of us have been barefoot on the land of our ancestors for 1,000 generations anymore, if that can be translatable to other land spaces.
Well, hypothetically, the physics of things like clairvoyance and clairaudience relates the concept of what we call longitudinal EMF coherence, the plasma bubble of longitudinal wave, which is simply a compression node where the portion of the wave which is compressional or longitudinal is ordered, and therefore, because it's a longitudinal compressional, sometimes called scalar wave, which travels farther and embeds and fits into this dodecacosa fractal grid. So tuning into that, tuning into ancestor memory, would have most to do with, in our simple way of thinking about it, the physics of bliss. That if you regularly had access to a form of bliss process on the land, gradually your longitudinal wave coherence would become in tune. But as you were speaking, I'm recalling when we installed our spiritual community, Circle of Life, Waynesville, North Carolina. And we discovered later that we were literally on the sacred burial ground of the Cherokee, where one of the huge Trail of Tears started. And my hair stands up even right now thinking about it. And walking out under that tree where the Cherokee sacred burial ground was, which probably had not been respected in this property, actually. And the women of our community frequently reported hearing psychically a panic among Cherokee women clairaudiently of hundreds of years ago of the Trail of Tears, right on that land. And actually, to be honest, that is the place where I first discovered I was clairaudient, right on that Cherokee energy line, actually. And but I think you had more advantage than me in that regard, because I don't think I have much direct indigenous ancestry. What tribe was
you just have it to Tutankhamun. So just
yeah. But what tribe was your family connected to?
Utah.
I see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and my dad has the ability. He has that. I know that there's a crystal up here that allows you to be able to see a lay of the land, have that spatial awareness ability, and he can do that. I mean, he can just walk up places and not even know where. And I also have that really good sense of direction that I feel came from that line. I do think more of my other clairs came from my Irish Scottish line. I can feel the different energies coming through, but I feel like they've been activated from going to, just like you were saying, the Cherokee built burial ground that maybe isn't yours. It may be in other lifetimes, but it's not yours. But that activates the other genetics of our own lineage to ignite.
Yes, and I'm remembering that we were communicating with some of Valerie's ancestral family, and one place where I also had that experience was in Prague, explicitly where the magnetic map was like a rose, and it was.
You
clear.
love that. That must be.
Yeah, but it's nice if we become more consciously aware that the fractality of the time and place affect the clairaudience and the clairvoyance because of that compressional longitudinal fractal grid access embeddability, quite literally. But it's really excellent that you have identified those lineage of memory in yourself. It's beautiful. And the thing that flashed as you were speaking is when I was a kid, I'm studying the Lapsang Rumpa Tibetan books, and they're describing pushing a crystal right into their forehead, actually, from the ancient Tibetan. And we now know the physics more, that the pineal gland actually is implosion point of the phonon, the infrasound of this, of the bliss sonics of the skull, the perfected binaural beat of bliss, flame and sound at flameandmind.com. So the pineal gland literally has to crystallize, and that's a piezoelectric, which simply means long wave embeds the short wave. That's the definition of piezoelectric. And so that, yes, center of vision. And it's funny, also, I was remembering, I have to thank my friend Tom Belisle of living in Cherokee, North Carolina, who had the most incredible heads-up compass, what you describe as being able to orient yourself anywhere, anytime. It's sort of like, when they decided that human brain sand had some of the physics of the quality of why birds can navigate. Birds actually eat the right kind of paramagnetic sand, and that's what gives them this amazing ability to steer.
Interesting. That's really interesting. For other people, well, I know that you've talked about, hearing the ancestral phone calls of your ancestors. Why would you say that that's important? And how can other people do that? Like, how can people get to that place where they can do it? And why is that significant?
Yeah, well, it's often said, for those who study the Aboriginals and most any of the ancient tribes, that the most important activity of the culture is making ancestor phone calls. There's nothing more important to any of those tribes than making ancestor phone calls. And that's why Karatkov famously, I don't know if it was a Kogi or if it was a neighboring tribe, but Karatkov followed them to where they make phone calls to ancestors famously. And when he measured the fractality of the air, we need to understand what that means. It's just a little capacitor that measures the efficiency of charge distribution. That's it. So, which is measured in the fractality of the Kirlian photograph of the high voltage spark. So literally, what we're calling sacred space, where ancestor phone calls are possible, is literally electrically measurable as the place where a spark can best distribute. That isn't complicated, fractality, which is called charge distribution efficiency. So charge distribution efficiency is literally the electrical engineering by measurement of sacred space. So the reason why that describes ancestor phone calls, which is what Karatkov supposedly measured, is, remember, in that Dodeki Kosa Earth grid 3D, the only possible 3D fractal map of what is sacred space for the Earth and sacred space in general, charge distribution efficiency is that longitudinal library, which is the library of survival memory. That's the point. That not only, to get a library card into that library, for example, if you want a successful birth or death, you got to do compression really good. At birth, the golden ratio maximum point in the passage through the womb, the physics of rebirthing. At death, it's literally an electrical black hole. Well, how do you get a library card into that electric array called communion of saints, ancestor memory, Akashic records? We have many names, as again, we need more electrical engineering and fewer names. But the point is that if that is what it has to be, which has been biology collecting, DNA collecting a library of survival memory for what, 500 million years, and to get in and out of that library, there's rules. It's a discipline, and that discipline is only perfectly shareable waves survive, which is only pure principle survives, which means only pure intention survives, which means you can't die well if you're angry because you're not shareable.
That's why the warriors are still walking around the battlefields. They didn't make it through.
Exactly. And what that means electrically is that, how they say, if before you go to bed every night, you close your eyes and you play your day backwards like it's a movie. And if you can play the whole day backwards without interrupting the movie, It means you've digested the emotion and turned it into pure principle, which is to say, have done compression well. And therefore, you've sorted your whole day into pure principle. Not only are you ready to sleep, but you're also ready for bliss or death, which are the same, actually.
And probably lucid dreaming. So that's a nice inroads to lucid dreaming exercise too.
Exact. Nice point.
Because Steiner, that's what he suggests before you go to sleep is that. But I didn't know that that's what that was doing, was the full digestion of the emotional experience.
So anytime there's a trauma of any kind, once you've processed that from the perspective of the eagle's gift, which is, how would 4 billion collective eyeballs look at that experience and distill it into pure principle, which is pack it into the library of collective survival information, which is an electric field, longitudinal array, fractal. We know the physics pretty well, but the psychology, that is rigor and discipline. And that's why they say when the shaman looks to the eye of the eagle, you see something which has so much perspective. It isn't like it's cold or dispassionate, but it would regard birth and death as fitting into a very big pattern. And, the things that would contribute to the survival library of 4 billion people at once would have to be powerful, pure principle, literally eureka, the physics electrically of why your hair stands up. Right now, some of the best car commercials are showing people's hair stand up, but they don't teach the physics very good.
That makes a lot of sense, because when I think of the word survival, I think of the lowest common denominator that made us survive. But then when you bring it into the concept of principle and pure intention, then it goes back again to the Kogi, and it goes back to all these other lineages that we're talking about, that it's actually that shareable balance and pure intention that is the key to survival and is the key to navigating, the earth and helping it in all the things that we started the conversation with.
And it's also what makes your personal memories not dissolve when it embedded in the collective survival library. So if your personal memories contain something that's of service to all, then at the moment of death, that collective survival library is going to need what you have distilled.
Whoa.
Yeah, really. So it means that, seeking pure, it's almost like, can I be in the Guinness World Book of Records? But it isn't just Guinness. It is actually the genetic library, library of survival information. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is very cool. That's my personal goal. That's one of my goals, is to be in that.
The distilled pure principle, and you can teach that story using the physics of solubility. And there's a story about it, about steam and soluble. So if you whirl a vortex and a column of steam were to go in, it would disappear. But then you whirl it backwards, and the column of steam reappears. Actually, what you thought makes you perfectly insoluble in that collective library is the unique power of the unique contribution you made to the collective survival memory.
Whew. I really feel that.
Yeah, be a pure principle. Yeah. Well, there were some other things we were supposed to cover this evening, weren't there? Let's see, we were talking about shamanism.
Shamanism, ancestral memory. What else?
There was that Egyptian sense, the word Shem, as in Shem on, the Egyptian word Kem comes from the Hebrew Chem, which the CH sound literally means access to a black hole. And so if we're doing what the science of shamanism is, and we should syntactically look at the semantic, a Shem on, if you dissect the term even Sumerian wise, the An, it's obvious what that means. That's from Anu. It means ability to be a sun god. You look in the heart of the sun, you see the Anu, and that's the father of Enki. No, that's the father of fathers. No, that's the sun god, the origin of every religion on earth. So An is clear. Shem, when they said, I will build a Shem unto the Lord, and they mistranslated that word in the Bible, and they translate the word I will build an altar unto God. But what the word Shem, altar, is a very particular kind of stone array, which literally electrically makes a black hole. I mean, implosion. So, you know, the privilege of being able to make an altar unto the Lord, I will build a Shem, where sacred space is possible, ancestral memory is possible. Actually, we now know where stargates are possible, where lucid dreaming is possible, where labyrinths are possible, where cathedrals are possible, where remote healing is possible. Everything depends on making that Shem, which is a place where magnetic lines are taught to cross, to implode, become centripetal, and DNA radio works because it's longitudinally embedded. Well, so from that perspective, who is a shaman? Shaman. It's one who can make or use the plasma black hole, which transliterated could mean, it means one who is plasma projective, actually. And so we could say quite literally what a plasma projective person is. The same thing that Luke Skywalker learned deep underground in nature to become a Jed, the raising of the Jed. The term Jedi in Egypt was well known. A Jed stone is an altar unto the Lord. A Jed stone is a very particular geometry. It's based on golden ratio. It's implosive piezo stone, and it's plasma projective, like Luke Skywalker's lightsaber.
And would something in a very practical sense, like the rose labyrinth geometry that you talk about, outside someone's house begin to do that? Or do they have to go where these ley lines cross? Can they start to, have their kids dance in the mud, build these labyrinths? Because I mean, I've even built I built a medicine wheel outside my backyard, and the nature has been drastically enhanced in the past 6 months.
Wonderful.
And animals are coming, and I've seen a big difference just even having this medicine wheel that I put in. But I would like to know how to build the rose one. But those things, will that help, to get people into these situations? Because we're in this, luxury situation where you live right where all these magnetic lines cross, and not everyone necessarily does. So how can people connect and embed themselves and do that?
But it's great, your story about the medicine circle. That's exactly the point. That is exactly the point. Actually, there's a picture. I just added it. So at goldenmean.info/rain, you see one example of Billy Witherspoon's very famous Sri Yantra, the size of a football field or larger. And he put a paramagnetic stone, it's either quartz or rock powder, piezo calcite white stone, in a shallow ditch in a Sri Yantra the size of several football fields. And it was discovered because airplanes flying over discovered Sri Yantra. That's how they discovered it. And he documented dramatic increase in local rainfall, dramatic, and it affected the fertility, and the geopathic zones in houses for miles away were affected. So all the local buildings that had geopathics were healed. It's quite an amazing story. So we did an example of your question years ago at our Torino conference center with Kudai and Claudio, and lots of pictures there at goldenmean.info/Italian. And I'll tell you exactly what so we walked out in the front yard. It was, not that big a yard. And we just did a simple little hand dousing. And we always say that if you can't douse, you can't feel the blood of earth. So the basics of dousing is essential for everyone and the more you have bliss, the more you become a douser, because the magnetic lines and make your hair stand up. So if you relax your hands out to your side, and you just walk, and you feel a little tingle in your fingertips as you cross the magnetic line. It's quite simple, really. And so we doused, and we found a small but significant magnetic cross in their front yard. And then we did the 7-circuit Cretan Minoan labyrinth instructions at goldenmean.info/labyrinth, LABYRINTH. And so you draw this little series of arcs, and you make the 7-circuit Cretan Minoan labyrinth, which is a projective flatland view of the 7-color toroidal magnetic donut, the classic implosion model of the physics of perfected turning inside out-ness, literally implosion. And that became the center of all that we did for, a decade. We did major conferences right there. And finally, out in the big field out back then, years later, we actually installed a giant Sri Yantra using the paramagnetic stone. And there was a dramatic effect on rainfall and fertility, exactly like you see. You become a seed of implosion. the thing about what we discovered about labyrinths when we put one in my farm in Western New York was that at one point we had to leave the farm, and the elementals had a very great difficulty figuring out, understanding why we were leaving, actually, because it's like you're taking care of a baby. It's like a burning fountain of plasma, and it's a child that wants to be nourished. And so it's since if you're going to start a labyrinth and you want to call elementals, there's not a way to uninstall. It's a wound.
And so what did you do? What did you do in that situation?
Well, actually, you know, they say there's a ritual you can do before you cut down a tree, and it's similar. And we had a very good shaman, and I must thank, actually, Sue Hirschberger is that shaman who did that ritual with us, who is the one who worked with Steve Tribeck, who co-made the film Whale Dreamers in Australia with the Aboriginal lines there. So we have a lot of experience with that story, actually. But yeah, that's yes, I see Georg is here. We're working with the elementals. I don't know if Georg wants to say hi there, but you know, he had the conference with the Iroquois there in Austria, and yeah, and he works with the Kogis a lot. Thank you, Valerie. Yes, and just one more thing about the labyrinth we did in Western New York. That's where living with Richard Leviton, who was teaching Ophanim how the Steiner people attract angelic forces. And in fact, that was true in the big back acreage there. We actually did work with the angelic Ophanim, and that's where we began working with Vincent Bridges, which culminated in the great ritual we did at Red Rocks in your backyard there for the Ophanim rituals, actually, which called elementals the size of star systems. And we had very, very large storms many times. You know, I've definitely seen storms the size of continents in these rituals, and it's real. I mean, we've been teaching for years how John Dee told Queen Elizabeth a year ahead of time that he was going to make the storm that took out the Spanish Armada, and you know, how he worked on the 7 hills of Prague to do it using the syntax plasma physics hypercube alphabet called Ophanim Enochian, which is literally implosive, and how stargates are made. So been there, done that.
Wow. Well, I know my job for when monsoon season comes. I'm already brewing. I'm gonna get all the kids together, and we're gonna go out to this mesa, and we're gonna call in the rain.
Yes, it's good. And it would be good if the place you went to had some memory of the sacred. It'd be good if you had a bit of a map, magnetic map of the place you want to work, and find a magnetic line cross. And it'd be good if you had a, you know, some amount of useful paramagnetic stone with a little quartz in it, or calcite white stone, so it will hold a charge. Then, you know, kind of collectively together, you build a stone circle or labyrinth or medicine wheel. They're all parallel ideas. The sacred 4 directions, it's all the same idea. And you embed that long wave magnetic line. And yes, that's the science of
And
rain.
what is embedding the long wave magnetic line? What is that practically? Like, how would we do that?
Well, someone once said, how would a physicist describe ritual? And the picture comes to mind of meiosis, mitosis. Meiosis, mitosis in cell metabolism is a ritual. It's the short molecules learning to embed in the long waves, and they call that meiosis, mitosis. It's a ritual. And what is it? It's learning how to embed in a longer wave to then enact a larger pattern, actually. So most any form of ritual, and that's inherent to every tribe knew how to do that. But some ritual that brings people together, classically, for example, if you want to weld a lucid dreaming group together, you know, you learn to cry for each other's pain and laugh for each other's joy, to the point where you feel each other's feelings so well that you could lucid dream as a group.
And that creates the shareability, is really the empathy.
Yeah. And that's what they meant by carrying Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home in the sun. It was a group that had learned how to lucid dream as a group.
Wow. Now, in the documentary that Valerie saw, and I guess you saw too with the Kogi, they at different places in the river, they for long times when they were upkeeping these different sites and maintaining the purposes of these different waterways and everything that was happening, they found gold pieces, right?
Ah,
And that then people started to steal. They started to realize that at these different sites there were gold pieces, and so then the villagers would come and take the gold pieces. But what was the gold then doing in those sites? What would you say on a science
oh,
level?
that's a very important question. Very important question. Yeah. Valerie says Georg should. I don't know if Georg wants to talk about that, but the physics is quite clear that the gold is one of the most perfected implosive capacitants. So the physics of alchemy there, same physics of chem applies, access to a black hole, alchem. So the alchemic function of gold is the physics that the electron shell valence symmetry geometry, the physics of what makes the SPDF completed electron shell array so noble, quote unquote, literally uncorrodable or noble, is, the S suborbital is toroidal, the pi suborbital is tetracubic, but the DNF suborbital 5-7 electron shell pairs 1014 is dodecaecosa. And so it's literally you completed the Star Mother kit. And so you have perfected implosion, not just in the complete nobility of the completed, no electron is missing, valence electron array, you have the same fractal self-similarity in the geometry of the nuclear hadrons. That's the new, so that, it is, nobody actually talks about it, but it's specifically the self-similarity of the nuclear hadrons, why there has to be one nuclear hadron, neutron, proton to each electron, because that's self-similarity completed, which means fractality completed, which means implosion completed. So the reason gold's valuable is because it's a perfect electrical map of implosion, which, if you describe alchemy as in fusion terms, literally non-destructive charge collapse. So if you want to plant a seed of non-destructive charge collapse, a little bit of gold is at the right spot. And that's why, magnetic lines break when the sacred metals are removed, actually, that it would affect the rain. So the Kogi were doing exactly the right physics by putting gold at the sacred sites. Absolutely.
And when you say implosive, because you're saying that about the gold, I've heard you say implosive blood of those that have, say, the red ginger genetics. What does that actually mean? I can feel what that means, but in a conceptual way, what does that actually mean?
Well, the theory of the physics would be that, we talk about how in the dodecaecosa nucleus and electrons of gold cause the waves to converge by golden ratio, which is how dodecaecosa embed. That's called conjugation of phases, or phase conjugation, or implosion. Now, the bandwidth over which the electric field is implosively phase conjugate would radically increase if you did that instead of at the molecular and atomic level, at the macromolecular or genetic level, meaning the more broad spectral the phase conjugation, the more self-aware potentially, which means, what the Mayans said, ride the long wave, Uncle Joe, which was get the long wave embedded in the short wave. You can get much longer waves embedded in DNA than you can in gold. And so that's why when we measured the ability of DNA to braid implode with the onset of the low frequency phonon of coherent EKG named love and bliss, that it literally implodes DNA. So the braiding, that the thread is then embedded in string, is embedded in the rope, is embedded in the fat rope, and the ratio on each occasion of those braiding would have discipline, phase lock, implosion, golden ratio, fractality, conjugation, implosion. And so the blood is imploding and eventually able to suck in a very long wave, a big electrical body, potentially angelic. So yes, the fire in the blood would be the next step up, which is why, that the Chinese, the Tibetans, they all learned to eat gold powder. The Bible, they ate gold powder, manna from heaven.
Do you still recommend it, monoatomic golds? I know that that's one school. That's like the Orion school, is like the external source of making sure to be in balance. But
it's quite a complicated question, and what we did write extensively is at goldenmean.info/gold powder. Specifically, I mean, it's biblical. The Holy Communion was literally eating a wafer of gold powder. That's what it was.
Wow.
And it was served in not a round white wafer, but it was actually also served in a pine cone shape. If you'd see the statuary around the chateau, they were serving gold powder because you had to in a full service city of the dead. But specifically, Thoth narrated a series of exercises to avoid fractionation of the personality when eating the gold powder. So specifically, and it's a bit of a long story, but briefly, for example, we had some of the gold powder made by David Hudson here, and it was quite dangerous, actually, I will say. It would burn a hole in your aura, and it was clear it would. Oh, yeah.
What?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, it was a miracle of modern chemistry. It was the opposite of sacred, actually. Whereas biologic ormes, agricultural ormes, which is derived from seawater, is generally quite fabulous. And so the science of how to make gold powder literally edible, they use a particular phosphorus that they would then bake off the sulfur, a byproduct of the bond, to make the showbread. And they called it showbread because they were baking it to make the gold powder edible. We have graphics on that in the Ark of the Covenant story. But so, short story, what makes the gold powder actually assimilable, which is to say soluble, is biologic process. So it's the same with any mineral. If you're short of iron, it doesn't help to go out and eat a steel bar in your blood. There's certain chelation processes which make iron soluble in the blood, and the same thing's true of gold. And that sets the metaphor for it is the context richness, which ultimately would be the intent. And I had that conversation with David Hudson once. It was very colorful.
Wow, that's really interesting. Okay, good to know. So more in the Ormus form, but generally speaking, I mean, there's so many nuances to how it was made. And
one great expert is in your backyard, Chaz at priestessalchemy.com, who produced the gold powder for Pat Flanagan after I introduced them. And he's a wonderful alchemist. He's right near you in Sedona. And you could,
interesting.
Yeah, you guys could have some fun, actually. He'd be a great guy to discuss that question with as well. But it's an alchemical process that embeds its environment. So, it's about sacred space. And it's not purely a chemical solution.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
But the reason it would be dangerous with the fractionated personality was because if you take too much implosion externally generated, the reason Thoth called it fractionation of the personality was because suddenly you got a radio with too many stations and not enough tuner.
Oh my gosh, is this why people are very fractionated in sacred sites? Because some people go to sacred sites and they're just completely off and disjointed. And is it because sometimes could this be one of the possibilities that there is so much energy and magnetism implosion in these certain sites, and they may not be able to handle that, and so they fracture? This is just a thought that came to me.
Well, yeah, it's sort of the old story. We teach it as part of Therify.net. People get into an amazingly charged plasma buzzing the aura. And if you don't do grounding afterwards, it's fractionation of the personality, literally. It's the same story. We recommend we hand out the book Earthing to anybody that's going to do high energy plasma for the same reason. Walk barefoot in the mud in a sacred river or do something to get grounded. Now it's medically proven, the book Earthing. But it's very easy to understand is that grounding is the process of getting into phase with the biggest fractal around. That's what it is. And so suddenly you've got a lot of inertia in your aura, either sacred space or plasma or Therify or too much gold powder. You've got a lot of spin. Your ears are ringing, you're buzzing, and you have a choice. You could either literally, how do they say, spaced out. And what's spaced out is because there's all this spin, it's not connected centripetally to one fusion point. And that's literally the electrical physics of access to ground, access to fractality, access to embedding, literally, yes.
Very interesting. Okay. And then you add in certain sites, you know, some 5G or some electromagnetics in, and then that would just make everything even more scattered.
Yes. And they tell people, you know, learn how to make an altar in your backyard or in your living room. What that means is make a place where you have a small little black hole that implodes long wave to short wave and gets you into phase.
And that would look like a labyrinth outside. What would that look like inside?
Well, you know, a circle of stones and your sacred objects and your medicine bundle on your altar, you know, a little dresser where you do your rituals and your yoga, same principle. Large
Beautiful.
scale, that's planet wide, you know,
Beautiful.
perfectly fractal.
Yes. So where do we go from here?
Well, I don't know if there was anything else. So our intent here was to teach the science of background for the science of shamanism.
Mhm.
And one thing, just in closing, I guess I should honor my years of work with Professor Phil Callahan. And those stories we didn't tell here tonight, but just very briefly. Phil Callahan was famous with Acres magazine for teaching how paramagnetic stone creates fertility in agriculture. And he also discovered why bees and insects navigate to the microwave and that the physics of smell is infrared, why the children haven't visualized a rose correctly unless the classroom fills with the smell of roses. The physics is now understandable. It's the flowering brain makes the infrared, which is the physics of smell, which is why hummingbirds crashed into the window of our ritual place in Massachusetts when people were having bliss inside in a sealed room because the infrared went through the windows and the hummingbirds smelled the bliss, the nectar.
That's happening to me a lot now. And I just feel so bad. The birds just slam into the window where I am.
See, yeah, that's a good sign. That means it means you
That's
probably,
a good sign, but sad for them.
well, it probably means do it outside so they can enjoy too.
Okay.
But the physics is infrared. Well, see that story, which was supposed to be part of tonight's conversation, it continued to what became then peaceuniversity.net, which is the physics of peacemaking based on Aboriginal wisdom. That when Callahan was going up the river, actually I think it was in Brazil, in South America, and it was life or death to them to know whether the next tribe down the river or up the river were friendly or whether they were headhunters. And as a professor, he figured out how to measure in advance whether the next tribe was going to kill you or hug you. And the measurement was simple. It was the paramagnetic permissivity of the soil. So if magnetism would pass through the soil, the next tribe is going to be friendly. If the soil is dimagnetic instead of paramagnetic, and magnetism cannot make it through the soil, then probably the next tribe is going to be headhunters, actually. and actually, this became a curriculum on how to teach peacemaking as science, peaceuniversity.net, because then Callahan made a prediction, which was the physics of war, which was if village A and village B are connected by a magnetic line that gets broken, like some engineer puts a highway in and doesn't know they need to measure whether there's a ley line there, a dreaming track.
Stonehenge.
Exactly. They put that's right. They put a highway, right?
Avery,
or
yeah.
even more horrible is in the village, where St. John, where the burial, the people came to, Arles, that's right. The people from all over Europe came to Arles, France. It was the biggest village. It was the biggest business in the village for hundreds of years. Why did the people come to be buried there? Because Trophimus John melted his coffin lid with his knee because of his bliss experience, which was later carried around by a Roman legion for a decade. And that was named the Holy Grail. That stone was named the Holy Grail. So why, the same way Padmasambhava melted the stone with his work. And so Why did people come from all over Europe to be buried there for 300 years? The biggest business the town had, because they said, oh, there you can get fractal and therefore get dead successfully. Well, guess what the town did? They put a railroad line right through the cemetery, and guess what killed the magnetic lines? That's the same stupidity as they put all these steel cables across the Parthenon now. It's idiot. They don't know what a sacred site is.
So it's the metal. I mean, I would obviously, if it was just a road, would it do the same thing? Or is it that metal that I know that is extra invasive?
Yeah, that's right. It has to do with dielectric constants. So steel or aluminum would be the worst. Actually, a road with bitumen, it depends. If they put a concrete road in with steel rebar in it, it's fatal. But if it's relatively paramagnetic, it's not going to hurt it that much. Okay. And a geobiologist can tell you whether the ley line has been killed or not. And the word kill has a very precise electric meaning here. But just to finish the story, so then Callahan predicted in Ireland and Yugoslavia and Israel, and he went and made measurements and he proved it, that where the magnetic lines break, war breaks out. You can predict it. You can make a measure and you can show that war is going to break out because the magnetic lines got broken. And then after the war in Vukovar, as I said, they went there, they sent the women and they repaired the magnetic lines and peace returned and the underground water returned. So literally, peacemaking is the centripetal force generated by fractality. All forms of peacemaking, because that is the physics of how waves make peace. And that came from Phil Callahan's work with the Aboriginal, the indigenous peoples of South America. So that's why I thought we would tell that story tonight. All at peaceuniversity.net.
Oh, that's so amazing. That's beautiful. Thank you for telling that story. That's a really nice, really amazing piece.
And we should credit MartyKane.com, who may be one of the most best labyrinth builders in New England, who did all that work with us for all those years. And I mean, we actually have pictures of her. She's the old Celtic shaman lady floating over the sacred quoit stones of Celtic Ireland. She's talk about paramagnetic blood. So a shout out to MartyKane.com. She's amazing. But all these labyrinth people worked with us for years. I could begin to feel young again just by telling the stories.
You are youthful.
Thank you for encouraging me.
It's true. Oh. Well, for the people that end up, I know that you're putting this on your channel, but for the people that end up seeing this through my mediums, where are the best places to find them or to find you? You have a YouTube channel, but where else? I mean, you've got a bazillion websites. Are there any places you'd like to, direct?
Thank you. Well, the main index is fractalfield.com, and it has all the other indexes. So the plasma tech for healing rejuvenation, therify.net, and peaceuniversity.net, and the brainwave measurement for bliss, flameandmind.com, and our heart work, realheartcoherence.com. So people we're pretty easy to find. Our YouTube channel, you can see that Fractal Field has over 1 million views, and thank you for being part of this, and let's plan more fun soon.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm definitely into that. So thank you so much, Dan.
Blessings. And maybe we find an excuse to have more fun in Europe someday.
That would be nice. That would be really great.
The return to the Grail country.
Wonderful. I'm there.
Great. Thank you, and blessings. So great to be with you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. See you soon. Stay tuned, everybody. There's more fun to come. Bye, Amar. Bye, Georg. Bye, Valerie. Well, I think that's good. Thank you. Blessings. Bridget's there. Okay, good. Bridget, Valerie thought that we missed an important story from Amar here.
Please.
See, the Amar story had to do with actual shamanic work to learn how to stop the rain, and about the price that you paid, that there's something the shaman has to take responsibility for when you ask the elementals. Go ahead, Amar.
Yes, and actually, I remembered this after. Well, actually, scientifically, after meeting you and you guys being so nice and helping me, teaching me how to stop the rain, to start the rain, and to stop the fires in Brazil. But like 15 years before that, we had a nature preserve. And I made it a point, I wanted to raise my little kids inside the rainforest. And it was a very special river, waterfalls, crystal clear, one of the cleanest rivers in Brazil. And we managed to even stop the hydroelectrics. And I was doing work, environmental work there. And it was a sacred site. So the Yawanawa tribe, which is one of the farthest from us, they're up there in the Amazon near Bolivia, they would come every New Year's and spend 1 week to do a ritual. And it was like a little beach and a riverbank. And they would, in this ritual, it was ayahuasca, but they had the drums and the chanting, beautiful, and fire. It had to have a burning fire for 7 days, okay? So I'm the one that knows this region, and in the middle of the ritual, about the third day, I guess, I get a little worried because I know it's going to rain. I mean, I even, not only because I knew the region, but because I have arthritis. And I don't know why science doesn't talk about this, but people with arthritis, they feel it in their bones before it's going to rain, the barometric pressure or something. Yeah. You can explain that. I have no idea. But anyways, I felt it, and it was going to rain, and it was visible. Then I say to Bida Brazil, is his name, the chief, Bida, you know, I see, because they had these homem do fogos, firemen and women too, that would get the rocks and the river rocks and make it red. And it's very difficult to keep a fire 24 hours for 7 days. And I felt bad. I said, these guys are working so hard. And you say that this fire can't go out for a week, but it's going to rain. And he called the shaman over, and they make fun of white people because indigenous, most, the ones that I know, are very playful. I mean, everybody from all ages, they play like little kids all the time, which is something very curious that has a lot to do with the rainmaking, the modern rainmaking that I learned was scientific. So what happened was that they started laughing at me. Ha, 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 ha. The whole village was laughing at the white guy. And then the shaman did his ritual, and the women started to chant because I warned them about the rain. And you know it, it started, it wasn't rain, it was sprinkling. Okay, to be honest, it was sprinkling. But so much that I had to walk like 50 feet to one side, and the fire is in the middle, and like 50 or 70 feet to the other side to feel the sprinkling. And I felt the sprinkling here, and then I'd walk, and they're all laughing at me, and then I'd walk over to the other side of the fire, and it's sprinkling there. So it was like a curtain, and it was not. After they did this, the fire did not go out because it wasn't raining on top of the fire. So I just, it was an unbelievable experience. I had no idea it had anything to do with science or the technique and the science to all this. And 15 years passed by, and then I met Dan Winter and his partner, Valerie, fantastic. They helped me. I was desperate that day, and they taught me to do the same thing that the shaman and the chief did 15 years earlier. Exactly. Unbelievable. But the opposite. It was visible.
It's cool that the shamanic purpose there required the fire, so the rain like was respecting the need of the moment. But actually, Valerie mentioned here too that we were working with the Western Canada group that was using the Tibetan tradition of it was Christopher Hansard. Yes, they do planetary moxibustion, and they would light a fire that would last for a week. But it was in the midst of winter, and it was a huge bonfire. They used truckloads of sacred herbs, and they would use that fire like a moxibustion on the planet to attract giant elemental plasma beings, literally dragon currents. And yeah, they would free them from antidoluvian. Valerie's telling the story here. You should tell the story. But the physics is also clear that the purpose of that fire, if you understand how moxibustion works for human acupuncture, it creates a longitudinal node actually on the planet. And clearly that would be a self-aware region that I'm sure the shaman could steer the rain around when required. It also reminds me of another story when we were told to call for rain in the rituals at Big Sur. Actually, Drindala was with us that day at the Hill of the Hawk. And we got a clear message from the elementals that we must not call the rain, actually. And we later learned that there were huge, for hundreds of miles up and down the California coast, there were clouds off the shore that would say several hundred yards off the shore. And California was having a drought, and the clouds would not approach the land. And we later learned, the elementals kind of explained to us that the level of paramagnetic pollution on the land, the way the ley lines had been poisoned, the water did not want to touch that land. Yeah, so, but you were right to say that there's always a price to be paid, and you need to consult with the elementals what their world feels like before you ask them to do very much. Which is why it's good that Bridget, you had that relationship with the shaman, with the elementals in Hawaii. That's that relationship. Yes. So thank you, Amar. Valerie thought it was really important we add your story, and I think she's right. I'm very glad you added that part of the story. Thank you.
Have fun stories with that.
Well, pleasure.
Yeah.
Then a friend of his said stop because it's not.
Wait, Valerie said there's something else.
Yes, Amar. Do you remember when you said your friend very sensitive? You said there is a responsibility to ask the elementals to stop the rain or to.
You consult with them first. That's what you're saying. That yes, that basically
yes.
the element.
Amar was playing with it himself.
Yeah, well, like I said, they're like little kids.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the 90-year-old shaman and his 90-year-old wife and all the children and all the nephews and all the grandkids and the whole village. They just play together from 2 years old to 90 years old, and they play the same game constantly. They're like kids. They're like kids until they go to another life or Indian heaven or whatever. So yeah, that's very important. I mean, people make fun of me because I'm never serious and I'm always joking, even when, but I can't take anything serious after the experience that I've had with the tribes. And today, and they protect, and they did protect me because I was fighting against hydroelectric dams in that river. And we fought, we created a movement. We stopped 3 hydroelectric dams and all sorts of threats, but nothing ever happened to me. And today it's the only river in Brazil protected by law, by legislation from any industrial activity. The only one in Brazil. So it's magic. It's magic. They really blessed the place.
Congratulations there. There's a hero for saving a river. Maybe that's a lesson for the Kogi too. Thank you, Amar. You're
saved.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Blessings. We'll add this story then. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amar. Thanks, Dan.
Okay.
Okay. Ciao. House. They're namastes. House. The Yawana. House.
House.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
House.
Thanks, Val.
Bye. Bye.